What's that back there?
This is Death Machine. Oh, wait. So in the intro, I plan on walking in and be like, hey guys, I'm Dino, and this is Death Machine. So I don't want to repeat that. What's up, gang? I'm Dino, and this is Death Machine.
So what is Death Machine?
So Death Machine is an Exocet, which is a Miata-based kit car from a company called Exomotive. What you do is you buy the frame, and you're supposed to be able to swap everything over from an NA or an NB Miata over to this tube frame car. And it's more rigid and lighter than an old Miata. Obviously it doesn't have body panels, so the aerodynamics aren't that great. And you're supposed to be able to build this type of a car out of it, which a lot of people use for track and autocross and stuff like that. Death Machine specifically is based off of an Exocet, but it has an LS1. So the power to weight ratio is a little crazy on it, and it was just kind of built to be a bit of an extreme car in the time that I built it.
Tell me about the engine.
So it's an LS1 out of a 2004 Pontiac GTO. And in recent years, I put 799 heads on it, which are actually truck heads, but they flow better than the standard heads that come on the car, which I believe were a 241 head. I have upgraded valve springs from Brian Tooley to allow me to raise the rev limit a little bit so I could get, more speed out of each gear. It has an LS2 intake and I believe LS2 injectors. And that's pretty much it. It's mostly a stock engine. It's got a few little bolt-ons to make it fit in this chassis, but nothing really special. I wanted to keep a simple engine when I built this car in order to make it easily replaceable. When I first started thinking about building an Exocet, I thought about all the different drivetrains that I could have used. Most people just stick with a 1.8 Miata and turbo it. Other people build the Miata engine so they could put more boost through it, but then the transmission's a weak point. Some guys do rotaries, some guys do K-swaps, which is more popular now. I've seen guys do V6 swaps into it, all sorts of things. But at the time when I built this car in 2016 to 2017, we didn't have the options that we have now. And I really just wanted something that was kind of plug and play. And since I build cars, I didn't want to be in a situation where my track car was unreliable and would take me a long time to fix. So my initial thought of, I could take the 1.8 liter out of a Miata and I could build the motor and I could build the trans and all this different stuff and turbo it, whatever. But should something break in the middle of a season, I didn't want to be in a situation where now I had to pull a motor, send it to a machine shop, wait 2 months, get the motor back, get around to finally building it because I'm probably busy doing something else at that point, yada, yada, yada. And before you know it, the car's down till next year. I didn't want that. I wanted a setup simple and standard. So worst case scenario, if there's a hole in that block, I could go buy a new one and swap it in the next day and the car is up and running within a week. And if I needed any parts for it, it's a GM motor. I could probably get it from any AutoZone. The stuff's readily available. I just wanted the simplicity of a motor that is running kind of in a default state, not something that I'm overstressing. Both the motor and the transmission, and it could potentially have a lot of downtime. And at the end of the day, the cost of an LS1 with a T56, which is behind it, is really similar to the cost of a built engine with a turbo kit and a built transmission. So at the end of the day, it's going to cost me about the same. The only advantage to the Miata drivetrain that would be built would be the lower weight. But, you know, it's a price I was willing to pay for simplicity and reliability.
How much power are you making in the engine right now?
This one makes about 350. In stock form from Pontiac, this version of the LS1 was a 350 horsepower motor. This one has an LS2 intake, which flows a little more air. It's also got headers on it, which helps. It's not aggressively tuned, so I'm not running the maximum amount of power that I could on this. I actually recently started messing with the tune a little more just to get a little more out of it. But yeah, probably somewhere around 350. Also, since this has 799 heads on it, it flows a little more, and I could rev it a little higher with the Brian Tooley springs that I have. So it could potentially make probably closer to 400 horsepower, maybe 375, something like that, if I really dialed it in well, between the intake and the headers and everything like that. But I never really went for peak power on this. I really just kind of went for reliability.
So what's the power to weight ratio with this setup currently?
So I'd have to do the math. So let's say I have 350 horsepower now and it weighs about 2,000 pounds. So you're at like 6 to 1, basically, 6.5 to 1, somewhere in that ballpark off the top of my head.
Does it hold traction?
It's a bit of a long story, but the short answer is no, but it's a lot better now than it used to be for a variety of reasons, mostly due to the suspension setup now. One of the few special parts of this car are the Zetas coilovers. We put them on last year and dialed the suspension in with them, and they really did make a big difference, not only just in the corner balancing, but the fact that I'm no longer running on 25-year-old original suspension for a Miata, so it really made the car more drivable and balanced. Well worth the investment. So it has mostly a stock setup for the injectors. I think they're like 34-pound injectors, whatever came with the engine that I bought, honestly. And it currently has a radium fuel cell with a surge tank. I got it running with a stock Miata fuel tank just to get the car going. So I quickly swapped that out with a fuel cell, a cheap one that I got off of eBay for like 150 bucks. And that actually worked for a long time, but I was at Pocono Raceway one weekend and the welds cracked on the fuel cell, which, to be fair, it was already 5 or 6 years old at that point, and it started leaking fuel everywhere, and at that point I knew I had to upgrade. So I decided to go for broke and get the Radium setup, which was the best one I could find, and Radium took care of me on it, and I've been running that ever since without issue. Hey John, how much do you value your life?
What made you want to build an Exocet?
So, bit of background here. I was tracking a lot more and I was starting to take it more seriously, and I was getting into autocross as well. And I was racing an E36 M3, but because it was an older car and because I bought one that hadn't been really well maintained, I was always fixing things on it. So half the time I was fixing things that were drivetrain related, you know, engine issues, stuff like that. And working on those cars is a little bit of a pain in the butt. And the other half of the time, I was working on things that were really just unrelated to tracking it. So window regulators were always going, HVAC controls, just different random bits and ends on the interior. One day I put my key in the lock in the door and it just didn't work. So we had to completely rebuild the key cylinder. Just random odds and ends that were just kind of wasting my time, but I needed them to function properly. So I kind of thought about building a car that's more simple, that wouldn't waste my time with these stupid odds and ends, both on the interior of the car, the body of the car, and on the drivetrain. For about 15 years straight, I would go to this big car show every spring in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And around 2015, 2016, I went to the show, and in the vendor area, I saw a couple Exocets on display, and the company that makes the Exocet, which is called Exomotive, was there representing. So I was probably one of the few people, relatively speaking, at that show that really knew what an Exocet was already. And as soon as I saw it, I immediately lit up. I've always liked smaller cars and lighter cars. I just like the way they handle. I like the tossability of them. And I was walking by the Exocets with my buddy, and I just stopped dead in my tracks, and I looked, and I just got this huge smile on my face. And the owner of Exomotive, who I didn't know at the time, his name's Kevin, I'm beaming just looking at the Exocets. And Kevin, the owner of Exomotive, saw me light up when I was looking at these cars. And I remember just walking towards the cars, and I pointed at one and I pointed at the other, and then I just went like this to like come in for a hug, and he walked over to me and just hugged me. This stranger that doesn't know me. But it's because I've always loved these lightweight, tossable cars, and to me, this man was building a product that was exactly my cup of tea. And I just hugged the stranger, just kind of as a joke, but also like just to show how much I love these things without having ever seen one before. And I started talking to him and asked a bunch of questions and became a little more interested right then and there in building one of these. So at that point, I started joining different groups. I joined like a Facebook group for the Exocets and started talking to some people. And I think I put a post up and I said, hey, does anyone in Jersey own an Exocet that they would let me drive? And this one guy, Vinny, responded. He's like, yeah, I have one that I built, yada, yada, yada. I'd be happy to let you drive it. So we arranged for him to come down to an autocross down here in the South Jersey region at Bader Field. And he let me autocross his car for a day. And I let him autocross, I believe, I don't know if it was my M3 or my Cayman S. I forget which one he drove. I want to say it was the Cayman. So we swapped cars for a day, and I remember driving this thing, and he only had a 1.6 liter, I believe, no turbo, so it really made no power, like 120 horsepower. But I remember, I went straight off the line and I put it into the first turn, and as soon as I took my first turn in that car, I was in love. I was like, oh my God, it goes exactly where you tell it to go, and it's responsive and it's fun. Can you hear me okay in the mic?
What's that?
You can hear me in the mic or no?
Hold on.
Put your headphones on.
Test.
Test, test?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. So the beauty of Death Machine is how rude it is. So I was immediately smitten, and I started raving about this car to all of my friends. So much so that my one buddy Santi ended up buying one 2 weeks later because, he let me twist his arm a little bit. So that car was a red 1.8 liter turbo. And if you look back on the channel from many years ago, I ended up selling that car for him after he was done having his fun with it. But that car was a hoot. There's a long story with that car too. But at the end of the day, he let me track that car one day, and I loved it even more. And at that point, I saved up the money to order my chassis, and the rest was history.
How much do they cost?
The chassis, depending on which one you get, there's, I believe, 3 different versions. This is the race chassis, so this is the most expensive one because it has the roll bar at the top. There's a sport version and another version that are both a little bit cheaper, but this version is somewhere around 9 to 10 grand. The other ones are maybe $1,000 less, give or take.
Are the only applications for racing, or do people do other things with them?
Some guys build them for street cars just to have something different to kind of run around town in. You might have mixed luck with that because wherever you live might have laws that make this type of vehicle tough to get registered. I personally was never really that interested in registering it on the street because to me it's just one more thing I have to pay insurance on, and I would have to do things to it to make it street legal that I don't want. I don't want a windshield, I don't want turn signals, I don't want headlights. It's just extra weight to me and extra complexity. But mostly people buy them as track toys.
If you were to rebuild this, how would you do so?
If I were to build one from scratch right now or rebuild this car?
From scratch.
If I were to do a car from scratch now, I might be tempted to go with a K-Series. Guys have done a lot of different drivetrains in these setups. Rotaries are really cool. I just don't know much about them. There's a few guys that have done electric versions based off of Prius setups or Tesla setups. But the K-Series is nice because you could still get a lot of power out of them without the weight. One of the main problems with this car is that it's very front heavy. We have it corner balanced. Matter of fact, the corner scales are right under my butt right now. It is still front heavy and there's really not much you can do about that. The frame by itself is already front heavy. That's just kind of the way it's designed. And when you put a big heavy engine in the front, it just makes it worse. So there's pros and cons to it. I'd be really tempted to drive some other drivetrains before I made that final decision. But if I put a K-Series with a modest turbo on it and made about 400 to 450 horsepower, I think that could be a lot of fun. And I think it would save me at least 100 pounds, probably closer to 200 pounds.
What's the weight bias?
I don't remember. Well, before I got coilovers, it was something like 60-40, which is terrible. Now I want to say it's closer to like 56-44 or something along those lines, but it's still nose heavy, but it's just not horrendous now. But before it was truly horrendous. And you would really feel that if you were trying to drive, say on an autocross, you really felt that front end weight. On a bigger track, it was less of an issue because you're not changing directions as frequently. But on an autocross where you're asking it to change directions constantly, it would both understeer and oversteer at the same time. It was very tough to drive at first.
So tell me more about that driving experience.
Well, it took over a year just to get it to the point where it was even remotely manageable to drive, because it was kind of like a bull in a china shop. It was a lot of torque, it was not a lot of traction. It would push a lot because of the weight bias in the front. And it took a lot of trips to the alignment shop to really kind of get things dialed into the point where it was kind of manageable. One of the bigger changes that I made that was fairly easy to do is I lowered the rear of the car down a bit. So you could see that there's, well, normally there was spacers in between the struts and the body. And what a lot of guys found out was that if you remove the one on the rear and let the rear actually sit lower than the front by something like a ½ inch, you would get a lot of traction benefit out of that, and that would kind of help with your weight balance as well. So as soon as I did that, I instantly gained traction and the car was more docile. Before that, it was just really hard to wrangle in. I'm an instructor at South Jersey region for autocross, and I let a fellow instructor drive it one time before I did that. and he hit about like 10 cones in one lap on autocross. It was, horrendous. I felt vindicated because all the struggles that I had driving the car, it made me feel like it wasn't just me. It was another good driver was having struggles even worse than I was just because this car was such a handful. But after I dialed in the suspension a bit more, and especially more recently after I got the coilovers on it, which we installed last year, the car is a lot more balanced and a lot more controllable. It used to fight you a lot, and once you pass the limit, it was very hard to save the car. Whereas now you could pass the limit and kind of dance that line and just kind of overdrive the car, but still control it if you're good enough to. And that really made the car more approachable.
Is there a world where this could be a rear engine car?
I've thought about that a lot. Not with this engine in this chassis. I thought about building a mid-engine car that was Exocet-like. People compare these to Ariel Adams a lot, which is a mid-rear engine car. That would really help out the balance. I think I would kind of have to start from scratch for that to be the case. Exomotive did once also experiment with a car, and they prototyped it, and I think they called it like the Exovet or something. And it was basically like a C5 Corvette turned into an Exocet. And in a C5, you have the transmission in the back of the car and a torque tube that runs through the center, and you instantly have a better weight balance there. These cars would do a lot better with a better weight balance for sure. But with the things that I've done, it's manageable at this point.
Why Death Machine?
Why the name or why the car? Well, when I built it, I wanted to go all out, and I wanted something that threatened to kill me, basically. Not that I had a death wish per se. I wanted something that was so extreme for the time, and I know 350 horsepower doesn't sound like much, but when it's in 2,000 pounds, that's crazy. That's the equivalent of 700 horsepower in a car that this drivetrain would normally power. And imagine tracking that car. A lot of people say, oh, 700 horsepower, especially nowadays. 700 horsepower, that's not anything crazy. On the street, maybe that's not crazy, but on a track, most people wouldn't be able to handle a 200 horsepower car if they're pushing it, because it's a lot. So I wanted something that had a lot of potential and that would run fast lap times, and something that would kind of make me sink or swim. I cut my teeth on some other cars with autocross and track days in the past, but a lot of them had driver aids, and I wanted something that had no driver aids. I wanted to sink or swim, and I wanted something that would force me to grow as a driver, because I knew that in order to make it to the next level, which was a competition license, that I would need to master certain skills and have certain things be second nature. And honestly, it worked.
Nice fenders. Are they standard with the kit?
No, there are fenders that you can get through Exomotive, but I learned before I ordered mine that they weren't the most reliable setup, and I chose not to run fenders on my car when I first built it because I like the way it looks. It's more aggressive, especially when I used to have the 275 millimeter wide slicks on here. It was just really gnarly looking. But I started going to different tracks that required fenders on the cars, so that way I guess you weren't throwing rocks at other cars behind you, and maybe in the event of a collision, it was safer. I don't know what their reasoning is, but no, I wasn't really satisfied with the Exomotive fender kit, and we ended up developing these, which was a massive undertaking, believe it or not. Everyone always looks at these and thinks, oh, well, it's really simple, just make a fender kit. You know, I'll do it. And many have tried and failed, but we put a long time into developing these, and we've sold quite a number of them. But no, those are actually a Speed Circuit product. Currently, we're considering a different type of fender setup for this chassis, so stay tuned on that. But this is what we're offering at the time.
So if this is a track car, why are you running street tires?
Well, basically I learned the hard way. When I first built this car, I was running 275 millimeter Hoosier A7 slicks, which were phenomenal in the right conditions. If it was a hot day and you were on a big track and you could get some heat in them, man, they would grip and you could run some really fast times. The problem is, if you were running an autocross, you probably didn't have enough time to get heat in those tires, especially at that width, not with a 2,000 pound car. And if you were anywhere, whether it was track or autocross, in any situation that wouldn't allow you to heat the tires up properly, so say it's 50 degrees out, 60 degrees out, or worse, or lower, forget about it. You had no traction. It was like driving on ice. The car always kind of fought for traction anyway, just because the weight of the car and the way it's set up. So if the tires would never come up to temperature, it was basically impossible to drive. I could tell you some crazy stories, but really it would just, you couldn't drive it. You could barely press the throttle at all. It didn't matter what gear you're in. The car just wouldn't grip. But if you're in that perfect storm of it's 90 degrees out, you're multiple laps in on the track on a track day, and you could really heat those suckers up, they were like glue. But in every other situation, the slicks were useless. So at a certain point, I started to suspect this, and I said, you know what? I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go with a narrower tire next year, and I'm gonna go with just a really good 200 treadwear street tire. I wanna see how the car feels on an average day that's not 90 degrees out. And it turns out I was right. On your average day, I'm actually faster on a street tire, because in most situations, even on a bad day, this compound has more grip than a slick does in almost every situation. In that perfect storm, that slick is gonna provide a ton of grip and be wild. But anything outside that window, it's undrivable. And so once I went to a street tire, I never went back. I would like to still have a pair of slicks for days that had that perfect storm situation, but it's really hard to justify because it might be a few days a year that I could really utilize the slick and really get that maximum grip out of it. And they're very expensive. So to spend $1,300 on a set of slicks that I might only use a few days a year is kind of hard to justify, especially when the street tire will last years and provide grip in 90% of situations that I need it to. The other problem with the slick is that they don't really keep well after a year. They kind of get hard, and once they get hard, they won't even give you grip on a hot day the following year. So their lifespan's really short for a lot of reasons. And they also wear really quickly too. So if I was doing something super competitive, yeah, I'd put a slick on it. But for 90% of situations I'm in, a street tire actually serves me better.